Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Tina Jones with the Portland Police Bureau. Today we are here to discuss a concerning rise in shootings and an alarming trend with homicides within a short time. There will be time at the end to ask questions as well. Today we are joined by Mayor Ted Wheeler and Chief Chuck Lovell. First, we have Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Good afternoon. I recognize that much of the city's attention of late has been focused on this past weekend's events in particular, which resulted in a federal officer gravely injuring a demonstrator. I want to make it very clear so that there's no confusion. The serious injuries sustained by Donovan Lovell at the hands of a federal officer were unacceptable. I remain deeply concerned about the actions of the federal officers, and there will be adequate time to address the escalation of violence we are witnessing in the downtown demonstrations. But for this moment, I want to speak to the tragic loss of life in our city over the past several days all around our city, especially in our Black communities and communities of color. We've seen an unprecedented escalation of gun violence in our city. In just the first 12 days of July alone, we've witnessed an increase in gun violence by over 380% as compared to the same time last year. I've learned that there has recently been a domestic violence murder-suicide. An 18-year-old woman was murdered. A 16-year-old was shot in the leg. Shots were fired from a vehicle in downtown Portland at a demonstration. A man was shot to death in Southwest Portland. A vehicle was struck by multiple bullets with a mom and 4 children in it, narrowly missing the mother. Multiple shots were fired at a residence where a family was hosting a barbecue. Between 10 and 15 children were present, and a mother encountering her 11-month-old child, putting a spent casing in their mouth after her home was sprayed with bullets. This is the city we live in. Portlanders, our neighbors, are being hurt by this violence. They're being killed. The violence and the loss of life are unacceptable. The silence surrounding gun violence in this city is equally unacceptable. Portland set a new record a few days ago for fatal shootings. Around the country, gun violence is happening at record levels. This is something that should worry every one of us. I'm grateful to Chief Lovell and the Police Bureau for the arrests they've made in many recent cases involving this violence. I also appreciate Chief Lovell acknowledging the human impact of these incidents on victims and their families. I know the families of the victims of gun violence also support and appreciate the hard work being done by the Portland Police Bureau. Americans and Portlanders are suffering from unprecedented stresses. Being home for months on end, being home and unemployed for months on end, the trauma of bearing witness to violence against Black Americans from the very institutions that are supposed to support them, education interrupted. I, like other mayors around the country, are very concerned for the safety of my community. The violence sweeping our country must not become normalized. The women and men of the Bureau are working to address these very serious crimes and hold violent offenders responsible. And I'm asking for your help, the public's help. If you have information about one of these crimes, please share it with us so that we can solve these cases. The Office of Violence Prevention, led by Director Nike Green, is working aggressively with community partners and stakeholders to focus their efforts and services on those most impacted by gun violence, serving both victims and their families, as well as directing prevention services to those most vulnerable to victimization or offending. Community coalitions are being formed, faith leaders are being convened, mothers of victims are being engaged. outreach workers responding to shooting scenes and area hospitals. Much good work has been done, and much more still needs to be done. I'm calling on the community, as well as the media, to be aware of this public safety threat and be willing to help and tell the story about what's happening and how we can stop it. We're in a time of great challenge. We all know that. But together we can and we will address this public health and public safety threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we will have Chief Chuck Lovell.
Thank you, Tina. Good afternoon. I felt it important to address the unimaginable loss of life Portland witnessed this past week and to share some information about what PPB is doing about this violence. Last week, within a 24-hour period, we witnessed 5 homicides in Portland, which is an extraordinary loss and difficult to comprehend. These incidents crossed numerous neighborhoods across our city and directly impacted many. This brings the total number of homicides for 2020 to 16 compared to 17 last year at the same time. Each of these numbers represents a human being, and we must not lose sight of that. We'd been hoping for a year with less loss of life, but unfortunately in one day, several lives were taken forever. 5 victims of homicide within 24 hours is staggering. First, to the families and friends who lost a loved one, I extend my sincere condolences. Many of you did not get an opportunity to say goodbye to your daughter, son, mother, father, sister, brother, or friend before their life was taken by someone else. While nothing we can do can bring them back, I promise PPB members are doing their utmost to investigate these horrific acts, follow leads, and do their best to identify and apprehend those responsible. Several of the suspects have already been captured and identified by our officers and detectives, and they continue to work with rigor on the cases where an arrest has not been made. We ask for the public's help with tips and information because we cannot bring these cases to justice without help. Many families and friends of those who have been lost deserve our combined best. Since July 1st, we have witnessed a rise in gun violence, which is unacceptable. In July of 2019, we're aware of 11 shooting incidents, excluding suicides, from July 1st through July 13th. For this year, we're aware of 42 shootings at the same time period. This is a remarkable increase and directly impacts all of us. It is normal to want to identify what is causing this increase, but the simple truth is we do not know. These incidents ranged from people who were known to each other to domestic or familial violence and other factors. While we have recently changed some of our staffing assignments, we have not, nor will we, discontinue investigating and attempting to interdict criminal acts of violence in our city. We are carefully watching for trends and will seek ways to adjust as needed and work with community partners to reduce these crimes. These incidents cause significant trauma within our community, and I hope others will stand with us to prevent these tragedies before they occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. So we have time for some questions, and we're going to use the raise your hand feature in the app, and I see that we have some. So first, we'll start with, well, first, can you please introduce yourself and your outlet as I call you, and Adam will activate the feature so we can hear your question. First, we have Tim Gordon.
Hi, it's Tim Gordon with KGW. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Mayor, the question's for you. All 3 commissioners have made strong statements about federal officers and what happened to Donovan Lovell Saturday night. Commissioner Hardesty demanding that those federal officers leave Portland immediately. Today, Governor Brown said Trump troops are definitely not the answer. Why are your words and actions not as strong?
Well, as to whether or not they're as strong or not, I think that's a judgment call, but I made it crystal clear that what happened in Portland the other night should not have happened. And at the very opening of this press conference, I made it very clear that we hold the federal officers accountable. I also made sure that I had an opportunity to speak with Bill Williams, the U.S. Attorney in the state of Oregon, before I released my statement. I wanted to confirm with him that they understood the seriousness of this matter and that they were seeking a full investigation, which they are.
Should federal officers be working in Portland right now, or do you want them out?
Well, it's a highly theoretical question. They have jurisdiction anywhere in the United States of America. As the mayor of the city of Portland, I don't direct that, but what I do want them to do if they're going to stay here and they're going to protect their facility is I want them to de-escalate the situation, not add to an already highly volatile situation, which I made very clear in my statement. And I have limited the use of certain crowd control tactics here in the city of Portland, and I want the federal government to do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we will have Kelly from K2 News.
Hi there, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is Kelly Ozair. I'm from K2 News. We are asking, Mayor, my first question is for you. What is the end game with these protests and what will be allowed and for how long? At what point, I mean, you've talked about this going on for more than 40 days now. At what point is enough in your eyes?
I said enough was enough the first night. And I draw a very clear distinction between the millions of people all across this country and the tens of thousands of people here in Portland who are standing up and demanding racial justice and equity on one hand, and this very small group of people on the other who engage in activities late at night, either in Northeast Portland or downtown, that I don't believe is at all related to the greater movement of racial justice in America. I said that on night one. I continue to say that. My directive to the chief and to the Portland Police Bureau has been crystal clear. Bring this to an end as quickly as possible and as safely as possible.
I guess my question is more pointed. How do we bring this to an end? And at what point are you going to make sure it comes to an end?
Well, yeah, first of all, I would direct tactics to the Portland police chief, who's also on this call. But from my perspective, the way to do it is to contain the situation, to make sure that if people are engaged in violence or vandalism, that they're held accountable for that on scene, if possible. And if not possible on scene, then make sure that we follow up with a rigorous investigative process. And you're already seeing that happen.
And then if it's okay, I do have a question for the chief as well. More to that same point, I mean, what can local officers do in the situation of, you know, federal officers having what happened over the weekend, but also what's your plan to get these protests that are now costing the city millions of dollars to stop?
Kind of as the mayor alluded to, it's a fine line. People do have the right to congregate and express their First Amendment rights. When people engage in criminal activity, then we address that activity. We do that in the form of arrests. We do it in the form of follow-up investigations after the criminal activity has taken place if we couldn't make an arrest at that time. We use the tools at our disposal to try to address the criminal activity and those responsible for it. I don't know if there's one magic answer to say that this event will make this issue go away, but I think we've been working hard at it for the last almost 40 nights, holding people accountable and doing our best to protect life and property.
And can you speak to how you can work with, or can you work with the federal officers? Is there a way to get on the same page, or do they kind of operate on their own?
We communicate with them mostly to deconflict activities because we're operating very close in proximity to one another. So just to try to avoid any unintentional confusion or dangerous situations, we are in communication with them, although they do operate under their own command and control structure. So we, the Portland Police Bureau, don't dictate their tactics or any of their use of force, but we do have a way to communicate and deconflict with them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll have Noel Crombie.
Hi, this is Noelle Crombie with the Oregonian. I hope you can hear me okay.
I'm going to try to ask another one, but
Yes, I hear that you have multiple questions lined up.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm wondering, Mayor, if you can talk a little bit about your message to the U.S. Attorney, Bill Williams, when you spoke with him about Saturday's incident. That's my first question. My second is, do you expect the Marshals Service review of the incident to be made public?
So first of all, I asked a number of questions of the U.S. Attorney. In particular, I was curious to know what their plan was going forward and whether they would commit to a thorough investigation. The answer to that was affirmative. And I also made it clear through my statement that my expectation is that the review not only be thorough, but that it be transparent and available to the public.
And did you get a pledge that it would be?
I believe I did.
Do you have a timeline? Did Mr. Williams discuss a timeline?
We did not discuss a specific timeline to the investigation, but it was my understanding that by the time I had called yesterday, the investigation had already been launched.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we
If
have.
I could just add to that, I want to remind people that the federal government has nothing to do with the local government. We do have federal office holders in this state, and they probably have closer connections to the federal law enforcement community in terms of what the specifics would be and the timeline would be.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we have Tess Risky.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
So my question is in a similar vein to previous questions. President Trump today vowed to, quote unquote, take over cities like Portland if violence continues to rise. So my question is for you, Mayor, what will you do if Trump continues to deploy federal law enforcement officers to Portland? Will you consider telling them to leave, and do you have the authority to do so?
I would consider telling them to leave, and I have no authority to do so. They're federal officers. They work for the federal government. They report to the federal government, and they have jurisdiction throughout the United States.
Thank you. Next, we have Nick Budnick.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Mayor, you announced a number of reforms June the 9th of police, and I wonder what further reforms, if any, you are considering and working towards, and could you talk about what the timeline might be on those?
We did the easy things first, Nick. We moved the Office of Equity directly under the chief. We supported reforms that have now come into effect through the legislative session, reforms that we have supported over a number of legislative sessions. So I was glad to see the legislature finally adopt those reforms that we've been pushing for a number of years. And of course, we disbanded certain operational units of the Portland Police Bureau that disproportionately impact communities of color. I would say that was the easy work. That was the easy lifting. Now the hard work is on other issues. Number one, I want to codify the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. I want the City Council to put it in code and make sure that it continues to exist beyond the end of the settlement agreement. Other areas that are going to take some heavy lifting, we need a community conversation around what public safety looks like in our community, including basic patrol services. For those operational units that were disbanded, those relating to schools, those relating to gun violence, those relating to transit, we still have public safety issues in each of those areas. So we need to talk about and engage the community and the Portland Police Bureau in terms of what specifically are we going to do to ensure that we're maximizing public safety under those circumstances with the disbanding of the units as they previously were constituted. And I put out a 19-point plan. All of those are going to require some heavy lifting, some work. We're looking at the bigger issue of accountability and oversight. That will require collective bargaining. It will require potentially a charter change. It will require potentially statutory changes at the state level. So all of these things are going to take lots of work, lots of energy, and in some cases, time. In the case of some, it might take several years if it requires collective bargaining and it requires legislative changes at the state level. Others we can probably do more quickly, but the work has to start right now.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we have Rebecca Ellis from OPB.
Hey, Rebecca with OPB. I understand you don't have the authority to ask these federal troops to leave, and so this question is hypothetical, but I'm still not clear. Do you want to see these federal troops leave Portland?
What I want to see is de-escalation of the nightly violence that we're seeing on the streets of this city. I have no problem with the federal government and federal officers inside their facilities protecting their facilities. That's what they do. That's what they always do. What I have a problem with is them leaving the facilities, going out onto the streets of this community, and then escalating an already tense situation like they did the other night.
Can I ask one more question? Yesterday, the governor, Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden, and all other members of the city council responded to the night of protests before your office issued a statement. I'm wondering if you could talk about why it took so long to weigh in.
It didn't take so long, number one. Number two, I didn't realize it was a race. I would prefer to be accurate and complete in my statement as opposed to being first. I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to speak with the U.S. attorney in person. That happened late yesterday afternoon. I wanted to ask specifically about tactics as well as investigative follow-up. I secured the answers to those questions. I then released my statement when I had fuller information.
Thank you.
For me, the facts matter for me.
So I would like to ask if anyone has a question related to the topic of this press conference, because we came here primarily to talk about a very alarming trend in homicides and shootings in our city. So if anyone has a specific question related to that, then I'm willing to take that. I see Nick Budnick. Nick, are you able to unmute?
I am. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Question for Chief Lovell. Chief, can you talk about what you are doing to address the gun violence in terms of coming up with new approaches or workarounds now that the GVRT is gone?
Sure. We've had to re-resource our folks because of the loss of the gun violence reduction team. But I want to assure you that these cases are still important and being investigated. We're having to rely a little bit more heavily on patrol than we have in the past at the initial outset of these investigations. But these are still making their way to detectives to get investigated. We've made several arrests in these most recent cases. And I think for us, it's really just figuring out the most efficient system under, the current structures that we're putting together to make up for the loss of the kind of intelligence follow-up piece that GVRT had given us in the past. So we're looking at ways where we can engage patrol and maybe some other resources to help us investigate those. And then also what the best way is to get this information to detectives quickly so they can further their investigations as well. But it is a little bit of a work in progress since it's only been not even 2 weeks since GVRT was disbanded.
Thank you.
Tim Gordon, did you have a follow-up question related to this topic?
So you can hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Chief, this is a question for both the chief and the mayor, and off of what you just said, Chief. I mean, in hindsight and given all the violence so recently, do you think it was a mistake to disband the gun violence reduction team?
You know, for me, I think it's too early to tell. Like we're talking about a 2-week snapshot. So I think it's going to be incumbent on us to watch these trends and see how they trend, see maybe what some of these are attributed to. I think it's too early to say definitively that, you know, had not been for the loss of GVRT, these shootings would not have happened or anything like that. It's just too early from my perspective.
Mayor, could you weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I don't believe that the city council's vote on GVRT had any impact on these particular situations. That is my personal opinion. That is not an investigative result. But number two, the officers are still out there. They will still respond to calls. And number three, the investigative unit is still completely intact. The part that I really want the public to hear today is that it's not just about the police. We need people to come forward. If you witnessed something, if you have information about one of these situations, it's imperative that people come forward and give our investigative unit that information. You can come forward anonymously. We just need you to come forward and provide whatever information you can that can help our officers solve these cases. They're tough to solve as it is, and without the public support and information coming from the public, they're nearly impossible to solve. So this is really an ask of the community to work with the Portland Police Bureau to help solve these important cases.
Thank you.
And we've got one final question, Kelly Azar from Cape 2.
Hi, I have two questions if you'll allow me. One of them, this is for the chief in regards to the shootings. Do you find or feel that the recent changes and even the recent attention and call for changes to the police bureau, is it making it more difficult to do your jobs on the day? I know you guys are already working with a deficit of officers as it is for many years now, but are these changes now making things even more difficult even on the day-to-day?
I think anytime you lose resources, it becomes more difficult to do the day-to-day job. But we have, you know, committed men and women at the Police Bureau who are working hard. We're an organization that's used to change. So we adapt, we overcome. We've been working hard with the Department of Justice for the last 7 years to improve our processes, our training, our directives and policies. So, I mean, we're going to be here every day doing the tough work of public safety, and it's incumbent on us and our leadership team to find ways to best use our resources to meet the needs of public safety for the community. Whenever you experience loss of money or positions, it's going to require you to figure out new and creative ways to still get the job done.
I'm going to jump in. We did have one more question from Street Roots, who we haven't heard from yet. So Jessica Pollard, if you have a question, we'll take that and then we'll wrap up.
I was muted there, sorry.
Okay.
This is Jessica with Street Roots. My question is for Chief Lovell. You had mentioned earlier in the press conference kind of seeing or utilizing an increase in patrols after seeing this increase in violent crime, and I'm wondering if there are particular quadrants or neighborhoods in Portland that have seen an increase in police patrols as a result.
Not particularly. Some of the folks who left the gun violence reduction team and the youth services division are now back in a patrol function. Some of our neighborhood and response team resources have gone to more of a patrol function as well. I don't think that necessarily correlates to increased patrols in different parts of the city on a specific or targeted basis, but I think we've really had to regroup and resource our folks back to patrol to answer calls for service. And one of the things that is worth noting too is when we do have the need to call officers downtown to respond to some of the nightly violence, that really leaves a strain on the precincts to still have cars available and officers available to answer 911 calls for service in the precinct and patrol districts too.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Mayor, for taking the time today. Thank you, media partners, for coming together. This was recorded, and as soon as it's finished processing, it will be available on YouTube in case you weren't able to get a recorded function. I also have a graphic that I will make sure gets to our media partner as well. Thank you all for your time.